the heart, I think, of any religion is shared personal spiritual experience. The church began with a shared experience of some of Jesus' followers, of the continued presence of Jesus even after his death. And the way that that sense of his presence connected the deepest truth of their own being with the ultimate truth of all being, which we call God. There's no way to adequately describe that experience. By its very nature, it's beyond words. And because of that, it can be fleeting and transitory. To keep that from happening, to keep the experience alive, or at least to get it stored in our memory in ways that we can access for ourselves and pass on to others, it needs to be given some verbal context. The stories that are told in a religious tradition, the philosophical systems that evolve to explain it, the ritual reenactments that get developed over time are ways that we remember the original shared experience. At this time of year in the Christian tradition, we tell stories about Jesus' conception and birth, and we express the special nature of that birth for us ritually with all this decoration, special vestments, special services, especially at Christmas Eve when we meet in darkness to celebrate the coming of the light. And both on Christmas Eve and at the service today, at the end of the service on Christmas Eve and for the gospel that we just heard today, we hear from the gospel according to John the assertion that the Word was made flesh and lived among us. I've always been, and more as I get older, particularly drawn to the expression of Christian faith as it's found in this prologue to the fourth gospel. And I'm drawn to it for a number of reasons. First of all, the use of the concept of the logos, which means word in Greek, the logos of God, the Word of God, to express what was going on with Jesus, comes out of Greek philosophy. It's not found in the Bible at all, in the Old Testament. But our Western civilization, the whole culture that we're a part of, and the tradition of that culture, can trace itself back pretty directly to Greek philosophy, and in ways that it really has trouble doing with the worldviews in the Middle East or pre-Christian European ways of seeing things or Asian ways of explaining things. The logos, the word, was the term used in Greek philosophy for that aspect of God, that part of reality that gives it order, that makes it logical. And we today connect to that idea of logos through our reliance on science as a way of understanding the world around us, in our legal system, our governmental system, in our sense that there's a rational structure to life and things and relationships and all, and we connect with that idea of the Logos, the reason, the Word of God, in ways that we aren't even aware of. Secondly, and so it feels like home, whether we know why it does or not. We're in the same line of thinking, whether we've had philosophy classes or not. Secondly, I'm drawn to this expression that the Word was made flesh, because I think it speaks of what for me is the biggest difference between Christianity and most of the other religious traditions that I've studied. Instead of seeing a tremendous gulf between spiritual reality and material reality, between heaven and earth, between God and human being, this gospel asserts that they have been united in the life of Jesus. Religious experience of ultimate truth, John says, is not something that's hidden in a temple behind a curtain that veils the Holy of Holies, or in an underground cavern in some ancient mysteries. It's not found in the acquisition of some esoteric knowledge, the gnosis that leads the soul from the imperfect elements of the world of change to a realm of an unchangeable, eternal ideals. It's not in some sudden realization that the self is empty, or that we are mired in delusion and suffering and can ultimately be released into some unattached nirvanic non-realm. The Word was made flesh and lived among us, lives among us. In Jesus, God is here and now. And so we can find God in the here and now. Thirdly, I'm drawn to this particular gospel reading in a way for technical advice, because I think it most clearly exhibits the kind of work that's required to pass on a living religious tradition, through which the original true experience of spiritual connection and meaning in life can be made consciously available to ourselves and to others. See, John, in appropriating the Greek idea of the Logos and using it to express a truth that was originally experienced in the context of Jewish messianic speculation, John is engaging in a process of translation and interpretation. A process that was vital to the survival of the church at the time and is vital to the survival of the church in our time. The writings of the New Testament, the codification of our creedal statements of belief, the establishment of sacraments in our worship, and the structure of the church as an institution were all elements of this translation of spiritual experience of the ultimate truth in Jesus from one cultural setting to another. it had to use different words, different thought forms, different ideas, different practices to communicate the same thing. It's very tricky. They had one foot in the Hebrew tradition and one foot in the Greek and Roman tradition. Now, that's best exemplified by the writings of St. Paul in a way, because we have a large number of them, and also because Paul was raised as a Roman citizen in a Greek city and then educated in Jerusalem as a Pharisee. So he clearly had these two streams. But the fourth gospel, the gospel according to John, in this prologue, I think goes a step further into real philosophy, real thought, a real depth of understanding that saved Christianity from just becoming sort of a mythological worship of some Superman. And this step was essential for the translation to be secured for later history, so that the church didn't die out like mystery cults or messianic rebellions that got put down. This ability to bridge cultures, to bridge languages, to bridge thought forms, allowed the church to survive the fall of Rome. It allowed the church to exist through what were called dark ages, to adapt to the rise and spread of colonial empires, to discover links to scientific enlightenment, to cope with the diversity of an ever-shrinking world. With each of these changes, with each of these transitions, translations, some institutions and institutional divisions were created that we see in the differences between Catholics and Orthodox, or Romans and Protestants, scholastics and pietists, fundamentalists and liberals, Jeffersonian deists, Christian socialists, death of God theologians. They come and they go, but they're all trying to take the teachings they inherited and keep them alive in a new time and a new world for themselves, but maybe even more for the generations that follow them. To keep the door open to that ineffable spiritual experience of truth that is really deeper than any philosophy, but that's one of the gates into it. With each of the translations, of course, there was bound to be some loss as well. There's a saying in Italian that translators are traitors. So there's some who don't believe you really can translate things. For some, the new forms and the new words didn't carry the meaning or have the power to pass on the core experience. The words themselves and the forms got confused for the truth they were trying to point to, so that people came to think that the Word of God could only be spoken in Latin or in Old Prayer Book English. The creeds became slogans. There was an emergence of sort of party spirit that even St. Paul knew was a bad sign. The medium became the message, and that essentially is what idolatry is. But we're living today at a time that I believe is in dire need of a new translation. Whether or not we want it, whether or not we need it that way for ourselves, it's our responsibility We can't be content with what comfortably makes sense for us. We need to have one foot in our inherited tradition, and standing firmly in that inherited tradition. Study it, know it, but we also need to take a step into the world that is rapidly losing touch with that inherited transition. We need to transplant, to translate our faith for a world that's defined by quantum physics, that's marked by political upheaval and uncertainty, medical miracles and weapons of mass destruction, and an avalanche of information coming at light speed from all over the Googleverse. And we keep trying, but it's not very easy. There's more communication possible today than ever before. But there also seems to me to be more loneliness, a kind of lostness, a sense of drifting where there's no center of things. This may be the hardest translation our faith has had to make, although you might, have a battle with people who are trying to have theological discussions with Attila the Hun. But it's also what St. James is all about. This place is all about. Our Holy Communion here, certainly, the welcoming love and inclusion that we share with anybody who comes here, the prayers we offer. But it's not just in church that this is happening. If that were the case, we'd be requiring everybody to learn our language before they could touch our faith. What we offer is outside as well, in our oak-encircled labyrinth and the Stations of the Cross, in McGowan House recovery groups, in the Jungian psychological discussions and Zen meditations of the groups that meet here, in art and music, all kinds of music, melody and harmony. Consciously or unconsciously, actively or passively, you are a part of this work of translation. You're not just an observer. You're a translator and an interpreter. God has brought you to that place. By coming here, by being here, even if you're only with us for today, even if you only come every once in a while, you add an absolutely vitally necessary accent to the speaking of the eternal word in a way that this world can understand and weave into the lives of people who aren't here. So at this special time, this Christmas time, we tend to go all out, and I pray that because of that, you can experience some of that ineffable truth of God with us, because the Word is made flesh for you and in you and through you to all of it. Thanks be to God.